We act in obedience to God, not just to look good in front of people. And so oftentimes we could get in the habit of acting and looking good because it makes us feel good about ourselves. Did you just hear that? That was pride. You doing good for the sake of being seen as good is prideful. It's arrogant. Jesus blows it out of the water and says, how about you do a good thing when nobody's watching? Guys, so glad that you're here with us today. We've been going through Matthew. Matthew has been a wonderful book to start. For those of you that weren't with us when we started, the official start date was January 5th, and I opened up the very first sermon with a genealogy, which means this guy begot this guy, and this guy begot this guy, and this guy begot this guy. That was my first sermon. And we had like 40 people in the room, and I was like, guys, I'm so sorry, but we're going to start with a genealogy. It's going to be wonderful. And what was interesting is a lot of times when we go through genealogies, we have the habit of like fast forward. Push the fast forward button, get through that, and get on to the next section because the next section is where the real stuff is. But what we found out is genealogies are actually very, very important in the book that we get to read called the Bible. That without genealogies, did you know that the Bible would lose some of its credibility? That genealogies show that it wasn't just a book that was written, but it is founded in history, that there is evidence of these people who walked and lived on the earth. That we can look at certain dates because of what the Bible has told us through these genealogies. But the genealogies point to something more beautiful than that as well. When we look at the genealogies, we see the story of Jesus. We see what has happened throughout the ages. We've seen the fall of man. We saw the areas where they were stuck in sin, but we also see certain characters arise, and we find out that there was a prophecy that was made in the Old Testament about the coming Messiah. And the coming Messiah had to come through the specific line of David. Matthew, as I communicated on that very first day we opened up, Matthew wants to speak to the Jewish community in particular. Who he's writing to is the Jewish community. And what he wants to do is to stress the fact that Jesus is not just a man. Jesus is not just a prophet. Jesus is different. Jesus is absolutely the promised Messiah. So what he does is strategically speak to the Jews by opening up with the genealogy, because the questions would have arisen right away. How can we be sure that Jesus is the Messiah? And Matthew said, I have the answer for you. Let's look at his genealogy. Do you see how it comes from the line of David? But Matthew wanted to do something even crazier. What he did was he told us from Adam to, I forget the time periods right now, but he goes 14 generations from this point to this point. 14 generations from this point to this point. 14 generations from this point to this point. And what's interesting is if you look at the genealogies in the Old Testament, it was not 14 generations from this guy to this guy. But Matthew says it is. What Matthew was doing is he was abbreviating the genealogy. The reason he wanted to do that is he wanted to show us the key players in the genealogy, but he also wanted the Jews to have a memory tool to remember that this genealogy absolutely does point to David and the Messiah. If you look at David's name in Hebrew, what you'll find out is each Hebrew letter also has a numeric number, okay? And if you added up David's name with the numbers of each letter, it would equal 14. Interesting. What Matthew wanted to do was make sure that the Jews understood that Jesus came from the line of David. But as we fast forward, we've seen already Jesus being called into the wilderness. We've seen Jesus baptized. We've seen Jesus do so many miracles already. We walked through with Jesus when he talked about the Sermon on the Mount. If you remember, a rabbi would go up and sit down. It was interesting. The Bible told us Jesus sat before his disciples. That was a customary thing for rabbis to do. They would sit and they would gather around and listen to their rabbi speak. When Jesus talks, though, we communicated this. Jesus talks very weird. Compared to the Pharisees, Jesus is far out there. Jesus is talking a different language almost compared to the Pharisees. In the Sermon on the Mount, if you guys remember, we talked about Jesus' whole mission with the Sermon on the Mount. What he was trying to do was reveal to you that the Pharisaic ways are not going to save you. That the Pharisaic ways, all of these rules that you have to obtain to be a good person, and we argued that as well. I see this all over the world today. They think based upon being a good person, we will have access into heaven. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that if you are a good person, you will have access into heaven. It actually says the opposite. It says, no one is good. No, not one. The only way that we're able to inherit saving grace is through one way. Jesus talked about that. He showed us that the road is narrow, that those who believe in me, Jesus said, will have access into eternity. And I think for all of us, the hard thing that we have in our Western culture is coming to the realization that we are not good. Because in our mind, we think we're good. We have a habit of being blind to our arrogance, blind to our sin, blind to our evil tendencies. Each and every single one of us are kind of like a horse with those guards on each side. I did that for you too. What are those called? Blinders? Thank you. They love horses. Blinders, where we can't see the full thing. And we need to come to the realization and just think about that. When we give our life to the Lord, what happens? The first thing is we need to acknowledge who we are, that we're sinners. If we can acknowledge that we're not good, all of a sudden we are able to find the one who is good, who is able to redeem us and save us. Jesus, all over the place, wanted to communicate on the Sermon on the Mount that just doing good isn't good enough. He wanted to show us that there is a heart behind why we do what we do. We act in obedience to God, not just to look good in front of people. And so oftentimes as Christians, we could get in the habit of acting and looking good because it makes us feel good about ourselves. Did you just hear that? That was pride. You doing good for the sake of being seen as good is prideful. It's arrogant. Jesus blows it out of the water and says, how about you do a good thing when nobody's watching? How about you get on your knees before the Lord in your closet and not pray out loud in front of all these people all the time? We talked about that because sometimes people see that scripture and they're like, does that mean I'm never supposed to pray in front of people? Only in the closet am I allowed to pray. No. But what happens is we get in the tendency of praying only when we're in front of people. Prayer shouldn't be something that we do only in front of people. Prayer should be a constant in a follower of Christ's life. Every moment should be covered in prayer. If your thoughts have been just harming you, if you have this tendency of going down a negative path, If you're struggling in your mind, which a lot of us, let's be real, majority of the conversations that we have is really in our mind, not out loud. And if you're struggling with those things in your mind, guess what? How about you start fighting it with prayer? And what you will see is Christ will speak into your mind through the prayers of your heart. We came off of the mountain, and right away, the first thing that we saw was a leper fall right in front of Jesus. It tells us that Jesus had a posse of people following him. He was very popular at this time. He had a lot of people following him, and they were all just wanting to see what Jesus was going to do next. This guy is saying some crazy things. He's doing some crazy things. We're in it. We're going to find out what he does. And they're walking with them. A leper falls right in front of him and asks him, Lord, if you will, would you heal me? We talked about that, but I can only imagine everybody following him when a leper reaches out in front of him, drops on his knees, says, heal me. Could you imagine everyone behind Jesus like, no, don't you dare, Jesus, back off, back away. That dude has a disease. If you touch him, your skin will fall off. Don't do it. I could totally imagine like people screaming on the top of their lungs, like freaking out. No, our rabbi is going to be ceremonially unclean. How on earth can we follow an unclean rabbi? And Jesus doesn't care. I love the answer. He says, I am willing. And it shows us the heart from the very beginning. Jesus desires to heal. He absolutely desires to heal. And he desires to go into the unclean places. And I love it. So oftentimes we think the unclean places are going to taint Jesus, but let's be real. Jesus is going to taint, cover, clean the unclean places when he's in the room. And if there's unclean places in our heart, friends, please understand something. If you desire true healing in your life, don't you dare hide those unclean places from Jesus. Oftentimes, we think we're ashamed. We think that we're not worthy. We think that we're too evil. And let's be real, that's the enemy communicating that to you. Because Jesus, throughout his scriptures, throughout the book of Matthew, what he shows us is that he absolutely desires to go to the dirty places and to remove the dirt away, to cleanse. But we also wanted to show something. As we keep moving forward through Matthew, what you're going to see is a lot of healings. Jesus is healing all over the place. At the end of John, I love it. I've said this basically every week, haven't I? At the end of John, I love just what John says. He's like, okay, listen, if you were to write a book about all of the healings of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, this world would not be able to contain that book. What that's showing us is Jesus was like walking around just like, bam, bam, you're healed, bam, you're healed, bam, you're healed. In the last chapter, we found out that it said that Jesus healed many people. How many? A lot. That he healed all of the diseased and inflicted with infirmity. How many? All is a lot. That's a lot of people that Jesus was healing. But what this is showing us is that, yes, Jesus is healing the physical body, but did you remember that Jesus specifically wanted to touch people? He wanted to touch them. His heart was not just to say, be healed. He wanted to touch them and say, be healed. The question is, what is happening? Why is Jesus touching people to bring healing into their life? And what we communicated is this healing is bigger than just a physical healing. Think about it. A lot of these people, the leper, was excommunicated. He wasn't able to be a part of community. Everywhere he went, he had to cry out, I am unclean. Think about that. If you had to tell your deepest, darkest secret everywhere you went, that would get really awkward. But not only that, he had to look worn down, beat up. He had to rip his clothes. People looked at him and ran away. They didn't touch him. They didn't be by him. He didn't feel love for many years probably. And what did Jesus do? He specifically reached his hand out and brought him in. The healing of Christ is not just a physical healing. The reason Jesus came to heal was to heal our soul. All of these healings are pointing to the ultimate healing that we're going to find out when we get there on the cross, to bring us into a right relationship with him. The reason Jesus touches is because he understands that there is a longing not just to be healed physically, but to be loved. And we serve a God that wants to heal us, but go beyond that. I've been healed by doctors. They've stitched up all of my cuts and wounds and all of the things. But I wouldn't say a doctor loves me. And if they do, that's weird. But we have someone who heals us, but loves us. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 9. We're going to start in verse 14. If you want to open up your Bibles, we can get going. If you guys don't have a Bible and want one, we have a couple in the back as well, if you wanted to follow along as well. Matthew chapter 9, verse 14, a question about fasting. Then the disciples of John came to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made." Verse 17. "Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the wineskins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, so both are preserved." This is an interesting passage, one that I've heard a lot of people want to use, talking about new wine and fresh garments. And we need to understand the question. What is being asked? What's the heart behind the question? Have you noticed that? When you ask a question, there's a heart behind the question you're asking. There's kind of another question beyond the question. And in counseling, I've learned this. You ask a question, something is brought out, but it reveals a deeper question. It reveals something deeper. The heart behind counseling is trying to get to the root of the issue, not just the surface issue. And what we see is John's disciples come up to Jesus and they ask this question, "Why don't your disciples fast like we do?" At face value, that just seems like a very point blank question. Why don't you fast? But let's think about that. What they're really communicating is, why don't you act like the religious people act? The Pharisees would fast twice a week. In Luke's account, it tells us that Pharisees fasted 2 times a week. We also find out that John, his disciples, would fast as well. We have to ask the question, what was fasting and what was the purpose of fasting in this time? And this was a sign of mourning often. You will see when people were mourning, they would put sackcloth and ashes on, and then they would fast. It was a sign of mourning. It was a sign of humility. It was also a longing for God. Do you hear that? They would fast because they're longing for God. And we find out that John's disciples were longing for the Messiah. They would fast for the promised Messiah to come. So what they were confused about was whether he was the Messiah or not. Think about that. Throughout the scriptures, you find out that John's disciples had different questions. There was a moment where John was like, hey, are you the one we're waiting for? Or should we be seeking another? And what Jesus answers is very interesting. He answers with imagery. And I love this, that Jesus uses parables or examples all of the time because he knows our brain doesn't work very well when he's speaking heavenly things. We live on earth, so if God is able to use examples from our day-to-day life and relate them to heavenly talk, we get it. And that's why I love also music and song. Because what it does is it puts words in an imagery, but also in repetition, in a rhythm that invades our mind and that we can picture what is happening. But Jesus answers with a marriage. And if you guys know, the weddings back in the day, the Galilean weddings were not like our weddings, okay? So weddings today, everybody shows up. You have a few hours, the bride walks down. The guy is up on stage crying his eyes out as he sees his beautiful bride coming to him, They say, I do. The lady does the little kick, and they kiss. And then everybody applauds. There's pictures, and then there's a party afterwards. The Galilean weddings were very different. These people knew how to throw a party, okay? These weddings would be a week long. A week-long wedding. Can you imagine that? I would get over that. I'm just being honest. That's long. It's a long time. But these weddings were a grand celebration. If you show up to a wedding where there is food galore, people are dancing and celebrating for the two that were united in one, and you show up and be like, I don't want any of your food. I'm fasting. The disrespect, honestly, that was extremely disrespectful in that culture to not celebrate the bride and groom. And what Jesus is wanting to show us is, I am the groom. I am here. Why are you fasting? This is the time to be celebrating. This isn't the time to be waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah is on the scene right here. And what he's showing us throughout Scripture, you find it in Isaiah, you find it in Hosea, you find it throughout Scripture, God oftentimes uses this analogy of marriage for us. That we're the bride of Christ. And what he's wanting to do is to unite their mind to Hosea, to Isaiah. Hey, God has told us that the groom is coming, that we're the bride of Christ. Jesus is strategic with his words because he knows the disciples will know of this passage. And he's trying to relate those things. But then Jesus says something that's really interesting. And a lot of times I think we could take it out of context and not fully understand what Jesus is wanting to portray here. He gives us two parables. He says, a cloth shrinks and tears away from an old garment. If you guys have ever patched an old garment with a new cloth, and you put it into the washer and dryer, that thing shrinks and it bunches up because it has been unshrunk, but the old garment, it hasn't been shrunk. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. I was like, wait, that did not sound right. It hasn't been shrunk yet, washed. So if you wash it, it's going to shrink and rip from the old garment. And then he also talks about wineskin. If you know how wine works, new wine, it actually off-gasses. And what happens when it off-gasses, it expands. If you have old leather that is literally cracking, do you guys have old purses or old wallets and it's starting to fall apart? It's crusty now, just hard and not brittle, or very brittle, but not, moving. And with this, what happens if you put new wine in an old wineskin, it will pop, it will burst. The wine will come out, you'll lose the wine, and you lose the wineskin. So what needs to happen is you need to have a supple leather that can expand with the wine. And what happens is we need to understand, why is Jesus communicating this? And he's communicating it after fasting. And we need to understand something. Jesus is telling us something new is coming. The old ways can't fit the new way. If you remember the Sermon on the Mount, it was the same thing. Just doing good isn't the way of heaven. There's something deeper that is happening. Jesus steps onto the scene and he fulfills the old covenant. The way of doing good, being perfect, set apart, so that we can now walk and not trying to do good, but to live in grace. To live in grace. If you wanted to join us, you could come join us, sir. All right, sounds good. But that we now get to live in freedom. We live in freedom because God fulfilled the old way. That we now get to walk in that. We get this new birth, to be born again. The old man is gone, but the new man now walks. Let's keep reading and finish it with this in verse 18, friends. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. Verse 21. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I will be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." Remember that. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping." He sounds crazy. He does. And they laughed at him. Let's be real. We would probably laugh as well. If Jesus came onto the scene, "This girl is very dead. What are you saying?" Okay. Verse 25, but when the crowd had been put outside, he went in, took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went through all that district. And I want you guys to think about this for a second. There's a couple of things that we need to hone in on. Mark's account, he likes to make sandwiches. The Marquean sandwich is what it's called. Mark is good at this. Matthew's kind of doing it, but Mark does it a lot more. Mark, what he does is he starts a story, and then the story's interrupted by something, and then he ends the story. We see Matthew doing a similar thing, right? We see this official come before the Lord, ask for healing for his daughter. As he goes, he's interrupted. And we've talked about this before as well. Jesus, oftentimes, when there are miracles that are happening or he's healing people, it's often an interruption. Have you noticed that? Jesus has a mission. He's going to fulfill that mission. But along the way, someone jumps out. Someone says something. And I've been challenging us. Are we a people that allow divine interruptions to happen in our life? Are we aware of these things and also willing to lay down our schedule, to lay down our calendar for a moment to see the person in front of us. And I see this so often, and it hurts my heart because I'm guilty of it. But so often within churches, we could get so organized that we're not willing to allow desperate faith to come into the room. We're not willing to see people in their hurt, in their pain, in their worry, in their concerns, and we just brush them off and move on with our day. But if you see, Jesus is always willing to turn, to pivot, and to see. And friends, let us have the same heart of Christ. As we go through our day, don't just do a good deed or a good work at church, but understand that your workplace is a mission. Understand when you go shopping, it's a mission. Understand your friendships, you have a mission at hand. Be willing to see people and meet people in their needs, friend. But we see this official come before Jesus. It says he's a ruler. He was a ruler in the synagogue. Oftentimes, that doesn't mean that he was a Pharisee or a Sadducee. The ruler of the synagogue often coordinated what was happening within the synagogue. He was the one that would bring people to come read from the scroll, if you remember Jesus reading from the scrolls. He would get the whole service in order and ready to go. But this man was a man of respect. Within the Jewish community, he earned the respect, okay? People saw him as a leader, authority. They wanted to learn from him, to glean from him. And I just want you to see what he does. This man has desperate faith. And I want to encourage us, let's be real, do we have a desperate faith? Do we have a faith that needs God? Or do we just come to God when we're in need? How about we be in a place where we're constantly desperate for the Lord? But this man is so desperate, he's willing to fall to his knees, showing humility, okay, and reverence to Jesus. But I want you to think about this. As we continue to read through Matthew's gospel, what you're going to find out is the Pharisees and the Sadducees are going to turn up the heat on Jesus. They are going to want to find out ways to trap him. Not just expose him, but trap him in fancy words. But not only that, we just got off of the mountain on the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus literally looks the Pharisees in the face and say, "You guys suck." Really. It's like what he said. What you're doing is so wrong. And how you're teaching these people, you're making even more evil in what you're teaching. Jeez. So let's be real. The Pharisees at this time, the religious leaders at this time, don't like Jesus. They do not like Jesus. And for this religious leader to get on his knees before Jesus and cry out, "Please help my daughter." Basically, he threw his career away because he was desperate for his daughter to be healed. Jesus immediately goes and starts walking. Mark and Luke's account says that she was dying. So maybe as he was walking, she was dying, and by the time that he got there, she was dead. In Matthew's account, it says that she's dead. Either way, she died. And as he's walking there, all of a sudden, we find this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. What's interesting is the Bible and other passages in Mark and Luke's account tells us the little girl was also 12. 12 years. That this girl that interrupted the scene has been bleeding for 12 years. Interesting. And what is really crazy is if this girl has been bleeding, she is ceremonially unclean, and if she touches anyone, she makes them unclean. So when we read this passage, we're like, oh, she touches Jesus. He's unclean now. But we see the reverse happen. But I also want you to think about this. She was so desperate that she moved through a crowd of people. She didn't just touch Jesus. She was so desperate that she was fighting to get to Jesus. If only I touched the hem of his garment. It was a little act of faith that just, maybe if I just touched the garment. But she was willing to be chasing after Jesus at all costs. She was able to give up everything so that she could get to Jesus. We see that Jesus turns around, and it's very interesting because he says, I felt power come out of me. Okay. His disciples in other account were like, Jesus, there's so many people around you. Of course someone touched you. Do you not look at Jesus? Did you feel that? I touched you. You know what I mean? Like, of course people are touching you. And Jesus is like, no. I felt power. And what that shows us is that Jesus is intentional with where his power goes. He's intentional. But then he turns around and says, who touched me? And when we read that, I've heard people talk about this. They're like, gosh, Jesus, why are you calling this girl out in front of the crowd? How rude. This girl is just showing faith, and you healed her. Why do you have to go to the next step and call her out in front of everyone? Exposing her as this girl that is ceremonially unclean and that she was desperate and touched you. Jesus, what on earth are you doing? And I think there's something beautiful here. He says, who touched me? And the reason he's doing this is he doesn't just desire to heal. Do you remember? He desires for restoration. What he just did is he exposed this girl in front of everyone, but he restored her image. He said, you are healed in front of everyone who was watching. The people in the crowd, they probably knew this lady was an unclean lady, and he just claimed her as clean. When he does this, it's not to shame her, but it is to restore her. And when Jesus calls us out, and it feels uncomfortable because our sin is being exposed, you need to understand something. That's the beginning of healing. When we are exposed of our sin, put before the Lord and even before each other, that is the beginning where healing and restoration begins. And this is a beautiful story that Jesus desired for her to belong. He didn't want her to feel shamed anymore. He didn't want her to feel distant anymore. He wanted her to belong with his people. He brought her in. Another interesting thing is we see Jairus, that's the ruler, asking for his daughter's healing. Did you notice that Jesus turns to this woman and says, daughter? This is actually the only place that Jesus says, daughter, to a lady. It's interesting. Because both of these stories revolve around a daughter. That Jesus sees these girls. They're his daughter. What is that showing us? That we've been adopted into this family of Christ. That we're now not seen as strangers, but we belong as sons and daughters of God. Isn't that so beautiful? Like the depths of what Jesus is revealing to us. And then at the end, we see this little girl. Jesus once again touches her, says, be healed, get up. And she gets up. We serve a God that loves us. That should be enough. Honestly, that should be a mic drop and I get off. Because so many people are trying to chase after the Lord for healing. That's good. It's wonderful. Because it shows us that Jesus desires to heal. In certain scriptures, it tells us that he's wanting to heal, ready to heal. That's good. But it's so much bigger than that. Because yes, he desires to heal, but ultimately he desires to be in a relationship with you. He desires to love you. A doctor can heal you, but it stops there. Jesus desires to be that great physician that heals you, but then loves you, cares for you, protects you, fights for you. We serve an incredible God, friends.